Hello and welcome to the show. This is your host, Kirill Zubovsky. How do you set your kids for success? This is a question that's been on my mind a lot lately. My kids are still young, but how do I make sure that when they're 10, 20, 30 years old, that they're successful in life and they're happy? To help answer this question, my guest on the show today is my friend Eric Koester. Eric is a professor at Georgetown University. He's an entrepreneur, a lawyer, once a VC, and a rad dad. And Eric's got a very interesting philosophy that he's applying in teaching and in raising his own kids. He believes that what you need to do is raise your kids to be curious, because in the future, success is going to be defined by what you create and not what you associate with. On this show, we're going to talk to Eric about his life, his experiences, and how they shape this new teaching philosophy, and what this philosophy can do. Without further ado, Professor Koester. All right, Eric Koester, welcome to the Rad Dad podcast. Happy to have you here. Let's quickly talk about who you are before we get into the whole parenting.
I'm a rad dad. Is that what matters? I'm just a rad dad.
You are a rad dad, but you're also a rad human.
Yes.
So I think I met you the first time when I moved in Seattle around 2010.
Yep.
And you were an operator for this healthcare startup, I think. But from what I can see, in the last 10 years, you wore many hats. You were an attorney, you were a startup operator, you were a founder, you're a professor, you're many things.
Yeah.
So
I just can't, my wife says I can't hold a job. So she's like had the same job for the last 10 years and I've had like 40. So I'm not sure what that says about me, but I guess it's good. Like I've had good, interesting stories along the way. And I think a lot of it has come down to basically just saying yes a lot when interesting things pop up. And even if I don't quite exactly know how they fit together. And I think that's led to some cool experiences and opportunities. I honestly never would have thought that I would be teaching at a school like Georgetown. Like I would have never gotten in. And so the fact that they were like, you actually might know something about entrepreneurship is kind of crazy to think about. And so it's been a fun adventure to be teaching and yeah. So I feel like I've been able to do a lot of different things, which is I think kind of what anyone in their 20s and 30s wants to say is like, if you're in the startup game, as you know, you just sort of want to keep playing. And so like, I've been fired from startups. I've run out of money, but like, I still got to keep playing. So that's awesome.
For our listeners who have never been in a startup, can you kind of dig a little deeper and talk about what it feels like to maybe be an employee in a startup and be a founder of a startup, how those things are different and, how your emotions fluctuate as you do it?
Yeah. So I think it's something that's, there's this infatuation with startup culture, with being an entrepreneur and things like that. I think I read a stat recently, 68% of people surveyed say they want to work for themselves one day. And I just think to myself, like, that's effing crazy. Like, why would you want to do this to yourself? Because being in charge, the sort of the founder of the CEO, the boss, whatever you want to call it, the owner, is incredibly isolating. It is, you sort of, there's certain information you just can't share. I mean, I remember with one of my last companies, Main Street Genome, there were moments of time when we were like bridging payroll to pay. I mean, and so those sorts of things are why co-founders are so important, because you want to have this air to your employees, like of transparency and honesty, but you also don't want to create so much churn with sort of the early stages of figuring stuff out. So I think being an employee in a company, in a startup, is incredibly risky as well. There's a lot of challenges to it, but it doesn't have some of the mental burdens that it does being a founder. I think this. There's just this there's this sense of constantly feeling afraid, which is both good and it's bad. The positives of constantly being afraid is it keeps you always, focusing on things, trying to be, lean, trying to iterate, trying to learn, trying to pull in data. But the other side of it is like that feeling of being afraid can also just be wearing on you. I mean, I remember, there were periods of time when we made the decision to shut down Main Street Genome after things weren't working. It was like, I was like an asshole to like it being at home. Like I had a young daughter, like, and that period of like sort of churn was hard. And I remember when we made this decision, I remember Scott Case, my co-founder, he was the former founding CTO at Priceline, came over to my house. We'd been trying to basically figure out how to do data analytics tools for small businesses. We created this like digital chief purchasing officer for small businesses like restaurants and medical offices. And we just couldn't get over the hump. We couldn't make it work. And we're down to kind of our last couple of months of the bank. And we made this I was on the road for like 2 weeks trying to sell. And I remember when Scott came over, and it was sort of this really interesting like visual when my daughter Quinn, who at the time was basically probably about like 9 months or so, she was, coming up on a year, and Scott's over at my house. My wife was out at a conference. So it was just Quinn and Scott and I, and this really interesting sort of like experience of basically looking at each other and saying like, we failed, we got to shut it down. And it was horrific to sort of look. We both sort of known for weeks, but we couldn't say it. And when we said it, and like, here's like my daughter there, and I'm thinking like, God, she doesn't even know what I'm experiencing here. And yet at the same token, it was this incredible sense of relief, because suddenly I didn't have the pressure of sort of like, a dozen people that worked with us and having them to figure out what was next and helping them do that. So it's one of those things that it's hard to describe unless you've done it, but it is something that you feel this incredible sense of responsibility to everyone, your customers, your employees, your investors, and that wears on people. I think there's a lot of reasons why a lot of founders have, mental illness issues and challenges, because it is tough to be in that position. And having had to send the email out to our investors saying we're shutting down, having had to sort of have that all hands meeting saying we failed, we can't do it. It's not something for the faint of heart, for sure.
I totally agree, but I don't really know how to do it otherwise.
Yeah, it's true. I could do nothing else. I'm wired to basically be in this position of constant uncertainty, but it also is one of those things that I think people don't recognize, just the turmoil that it causes to have these sort of uncertain worlds that you don't know what the outcome will look like.
But you were an attorney, right? From what I understand, that's a pretty hard profession, mm-hmm. Like a lot of stress there as well. Does it compare at all, or are startups just 10, 100x more extreme?
They're both hard. I mean, I think people always ask me like what it was like, because I was in a big firm, like I was in a top 50 law firm in terms of like size wise. And so I was at Cooley, I was a startup lawyer, I was doing M&A and IPOs. And I remember like the year before I left, I think I billed 2,800 hours, which means I actually worked probably like over 3,000 hours. And it was a lot. And I think a lot of people don't like recognize, basically if you work 40 hours a week, it means there's, and you take vacation, that means 2,000 hours is sort of how it should. When you bill, basically you bill, if you bill 1 hour, you actually probably usually work like 1.2 hours to get that number of hours. Like this is admin time and lunchtime and stuff like that. So it's basically insanity. Like it's bonkers. It's weekends, it's nights. And so I would say the hours and the hard work were the same. I really enjoyed it. I loved being an attorney. I loved working with entrepreneurs. But what I felt was missing in it, that I would say misses from the startup, is the game that you can potentially win isn't there. Winning, basically, like with an attorney, your clock starts over at the end of the next year. You start at 0 hours and you work your way up to hit your hours and billables and money. There's no sense of like winning. It's just like you do it over again. So the joke about being an attorney is it's a pie eating contest. The prize for winning is you get more pie. So that's the thing about being an attorney that sort of sucks. It's just like it is more time, more hours. And again, I loved it. Worked with super smart people, learned a ton. I would say being an attorney prepared me to be an entrepreneur, even just dealing with the uncertainty. And I'm not like a successful entrepreneur by any means, but it did prepare me to like just think through problems. But what I love about startups is it is a team sport. It's a culture driven, it's a people driven thing. And, there certainly is something about being able to get a bunch of bright people together fighting for something with an uncertain outcome, even when, they're sort of, they may not make as much money as they did other places, but that the opportunity to create something is unlike anything else I've ever experienced, that you get to do once you're in and get to run a startup.
For sure. And you mentioned it a few minutes ago that you were once fired from a startup. So what's it like to go from a team sport, with the friends that you've known forever, to all of a sudden being fired and just being left out in the cold?
Yeah, I mean, I got, startups, and particularly, high growth venture backed startups, is certainly a contact sport. It's not touch football. It is tackle. And it's for the big kids. You got to put on your big kid pants every day. We started a company out of a weekend example, a weekend hackathon called Startup Weekend. We started a company called Zaarly, and Zaarly was, at the start of it, was basically we were coming into the trend of mobile was just becoming sort of smartphone mobility was becoming powerful. This was in like 2011. So you'd seen the rise of Twitter, you'd seen the starting of the rise of Facebook, and you hadn't really seen sort of much commerce yet. Like this was sort of right around the time when Uber was just breaking out. And so I was on a panel with Travis early on when we were both like early in this like sort of mobile commerce game where we were doing sort of all sorts of services and, ask for anything marketplace. You could get a sandwich on our platform. You could get a house cleaner. You could get a used iPad. And so the neat part about the time was that people were seeing the smartphone as the remote control for everything else. Push a button and a car comes. Push a button and you could get a hotel in someone's house on Airbnb. Like the smartphone became this powerful tool for commerce, and we got to play early in that game. So we started this weekend project, and at this hackathon, one of our judges happened to be Ashton Kutcher, who saw what we were doing, his bet early on some of these things, saw us and said, like, I love what you guys are doing. Why don't you guys quit your jobs and start a company? And we just met, all of us, like my three co-founders, Bo, Ian, and I had just literally met that weekend. So it was like, Ashton Kutcher wants to give us $1 million to start a company. Yes, please. So we went after it. But I would say the biggest thing that I would caution in that one is we were not experts in the space yet. We didn't know local commerce very well. We hadn't launched mobile commerce companies. No one had. We were just in this dawn of what it looked like. No one sort of knew the way that things would shake out. So we ran after it. We, launched our product at South by Southwest, and it was super hacky, but it worked. And from there, we raised a whole bunch of money. We got Meg Whitman to serve on our board. And the craziest part of all of it is we did not have product market fit. So here we were living in buzzy San Francisco, like build a team of 50 plus people, and we did not have product market fit. We were basically a marketplace that was getting arbitraged by Craigslist every single transaction. And we couldn't figure it out. And I think my learning in all of that was like we had this incredible team of young people who were dedicated, and we just did not build a culture of transparency, and we didn't build a culture of coaching, of learning. And so we brought in all these people who bought into the dream of building this amazing company. And again, some amazing people who've gone on to do great things. And I think my failure as a founder and as a human was I basically kind of like tried to isolate myself in some ways from everything and tried to play the blame game of we don't have product market fit. And I think the outcome of it, of not really understanding the transparency was important, and this sort of like tension of building a 50-person company without product market fit made me into sort of an asshole. Like I was not a great co-founder. I was not a great manager. And when we sort of went through our cycle of like trying to find product market fit and continuing to like get bashed after our first, sort of 18 months in the game, I think that it was sort of obvious that someone had to pay for the penalties of us not having it. And it was really obvious. Like it wasn't going to be Ian, who was our CTO, and we needed him because he was a developer, and Bo was kind of the visionary. I was clearly the guy who was like the one to fall. And I think it taught me an awful lot. Like I remember vividly, I was going to have this conversation with Bo, the CEO, and my co-founder and a good friend, telling him that like the culture was fucked and it was, everyone's fault and he needed to move to San Francisco and blah, 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 all these things. And I remember like, I said, Bo, we got to meet. And he's like, yeah, we got to meet. We walk outside in Mint Plaza in San Francisco, walked on the elevator, we're chit-chatting, and he sits down with me and he like looks at me. He's like, dude, I got to let you go. And I was like, you can't fire me from my own company. Like I started this company with you. What are you talking about? And he's like, dude, like you've just lost the company. You've lost faith. And, in some ways we've entirely lost the company. All of us have, but you in particular had lost it. And I was like, I was belligerent. No way. This is your fault, blah, 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 blah. And, the hindsight in that looking back is like, really, I didn't know myself. I wasn't really listening. I wasn't really like using data to make decisions. And so it was probably a surprise that I made it that long. Frankly, it was the magic of the co-founder. But yeah, I mean, it basically took me a while to get over that. And I would still say I have a chip on my shoulder a little bit, not at other people, but at myself for sort of not really understanding how to manage through a tough situation. And I look back on it. I mean, I think it was perhaps one of the best things to happen to me, to go through the failure, to learn a lot. I realize how little I know and how much I'm learning every day. But yeah, it was brutal to get fired by your co-founder when in your own company and not know what to say, not know what to tell people. I remember like vividly, I gave a talk on stage and I had already been fired, and I did not tell anyone in the stage of 1,000 people that I had been fired, because I was like too proud when, it was one of those things that like, I basically put up this wall of invincibility when the reality was I needed to grow up a lot.
That sounds like a typical startup.
Yeah. I think
but I'm actually really glad you touched on the subject, because I think it's really important that, and correct me if I'm wrong, but once you start telling other people that they're wrong and you start seeing wrong in other people, and that clouds kind of all your thinking, that really points back to you, or it should be a wake-up call to yourself that you are actually the one wrong. Because personally, I think you can change what you do. You can maximize your output. What other people do is their problem, right? You can kind of help and steer them and work together, but really, once you see everything through other people's lens, you're pretty screwed.
I mean, I think it's one of those things that today, perhaps more than any other time in history, is do people value authenticity? Do people value transparency? I think it's listen, failure is it's a normal part of living in the high stakes world of venture finance companies that, right? I mean, the numbers are just not good. The returns on early stage companies are low, even if you raise venture. And so I think it's just part of the nature. I think that what the challenge though is that it can feel like, back to the earlier part, the weight of the world's on your shoulders. You're like the person you're the founder. You're supposed to have everything figured out. And I think it's part of the thing that why, being able to find safe places to share your struggles and challenges with other people is really important. And I think it's today made me better as a coach and as a mentor to other startups. I hope, I'm just like, listen, I've been there. It is rough and I know it. And even, young people who think about entrepreneurship, I think I come at it from I don't know the answers. I've not figured it out. I'm not some successful guy who's founded a unicorn. I'm just some guy who gets to keep playing. And that's part of the glory of this one is like, I love the game. The results don't always go your way.
Well, you founded a unicorn. It just ran out of steam.
I do feel super fortunate. I mean, I would say Zaarly was one of those real timing opportunities. This is kind of interesting to think about. So Zaarly, again, was early in the process of sort of this concept of mobile commerce. And so we were just at the start of the appification of the world. And there was no certainty that Uber was going to be the success that it was when we started. So this is interesting for you. When we started out, we had this ask for anything marketplace that anyone across the country could ask for anything. And we basically built this routing engine to be able to help them get it, whether they wanted a used iPad or whatever it was. But because we were open, kind of like eBay, people could put whatever they want in terms of their requests. And so one of the things that's funny is we would track what were our most common requests. So again, we're early in this game, we're playing this game, and we took the strategy, in some ways guided by Meg Whitman's advice, who was the CEO of eBay, that like their success was to being a broad platform, which was really kind of what worked in the internet age. Mobile turned out to be different. It turned out to be where it was about being verticalization. So that's why Uber is just a ride sharing company in sort of quote unquote just, but our top 5 categories. Yeah, I don't know. But for the most part, it's about logistics and transportation. But here's our top 5 categories, right? Number 1, rides. People would go on Zaarly and ask for rides because there was just not this ubiquity of Uber and Lyft. That was number 1. Number 2, food delivery. Surprise, surprise, right? Look at Postmates and things like that. Number 3, grocery delivery. Look at Instacart, right? Number 4 were things like home services like Handyman. So look at things like Handy and look at things like Thumbtack. So we were right in the sort of the strategy at the high level of going after this sort of mobilization of people's requests and capturing their demand was right. We were just wrong in how we approached it, right? Our 5th category was basically to stay at someone's house, right? Like room sharing, Airbnb, right? So we were right in the theme, but I think it sort of shows you that sometimes your strategy was wrong. And I think it's, mad props to Uber for figuring it out. But remember, at the time when Uber was coming out, there was this battle between Taxi Magic and Uber/Lyft of who's going to win. Like, Taxi Magic has taxis, is going to work. Well, turned out the experience was better on Uber, and I think it's always interesting to sort of reflect on what you did wrong. And I think ours was, we played the strategy of thinking we wanted to be a broader platform that had multiple use cases on it, and mobile has not played out that way. The app world has really made it. You have a single button that gets you kind of one specific use case for the most part.
I agree. I saw it myself, but I think another great lesson here is you don't always have to come up with your own ideas. Back in the day, if you went on Zaarly and you looked what people wanted and cross-referenced it to the startups that were popping up, right? Yep. Like all the food delivery and that kind of stuff. And granted, a lot of them failed after raising millions and millions of dollars, right?
Yeah.
But as a way to identify what people are looking for, that's not a bad strategy.
Yeah, I mean, it was. We learned a lot. I think listen. As much as venture capitalists know what they're getting themselves into, and having played a little bit on that side of the fence, you know that you're playing an odds game where you're basically going to have a lot of failures and hopefully one or two that break out in a major way. I'm thankful to have had the education learning to be able to figure out what it felt like to learn it. And I think, there's a reason why people are drawn to it. It is alluring. It is magical. You do have these companies that create generational wealth. I mean, you look at the 5 most valuable companies today. It's Apple, it's Microsoft, it's Facebook, it's Amazon. Those are companies that really didn't exist 30 years ago. And I think technology has enabled a new wave of people to build some generational companies that will be around for a long period of time, we hope.
Well, I hope I build one too.
Yeah, me too.
It helps. I think I was listening to Naval talk on Periscope the other day, and he said, you know what? Like, at the end of the day, everyone is selfish. Like, we all want to do all these exciting things, but at the end of the day, everyone has something for themselves as well. And this multi-billion-dollar generational company sounds like a really good idea.
Yeah, it would be pretty awesome, wouldn't it?
I'm still working on it. But let's actually talk about what you said here about getting all these learning opportunities that you can now pass on to other people. Because I'm really curious to hear about this experiment you did in Georgetown with the students who all went on launching books.
Yeah.
And 14 out of 16 students, something like that, launched a book within a year of being your student.
We've had 30 authors publish books in the last year, and we'll have 30 more published in April. It's bonkers, man. I have to tell you, the craziest thing I think I've ever been a part of. And it happened by accident, right? Like I actually started teaching largely because I didn't know how to process my failure. I'd failed at Zaarly. I got the chance I was serving on a board with Steve Blank, kind of the guru of sort of, this lean startup thing. And he brought me to the ranch and he's like, hey, you know what you should do to process this sort of failure that you don't understand yet? You should teach. And so I was like, that's amazing. That's cool. And so I started doing some teaching with Steve and with Startup Weekend, going out and sort of teaching this thing. And I as I was moving back from San Francisco, I'd been living in San Francisco to start Zaarly. I moved back to DC. I didn't really have any network here. And so I was at an event with my wife, who's a professor at Georgetown, and got introduced to the entrepreneurship head. And he's like, oh my God, you're like a real entrepreneur who knows teaching. Why don't you teach? And that was my first foray. That was about 5 years ago. And so the first thing was like, I just walked in and did this sort of Steve Blanky thing. I'm helping people like use lean startup to launch companies, and started with MBA students. And I guess they sort of dug it. And they asked me to teach another class. And there's me now teaching 2 MBA classes a year and working on my next company. And then they're like, hey, would you teach undergrads? Would you teach high school students? So basically over about a 4-year period, I went from not teaching really much of anything and like dealing with this failure to teaching 5 classes per year and over 300 students. And it was amazing. It was really interesting. I met a bunch of people. I loved engaging with students. But, as the topic of your talk, your sort of podcast is, I was also a dad at this point. So as I'm sort of processing myself, this is the summer of 2016. I just had my second daughter. So I've got, at that point, I had like a 20-month-old and I have a 6-week-old. And I'm thinking about preparing for the fall to like teach. And I'm like, man, I just don't have time. I got to think about my next company. I want to do these things. And so I basically sort of reflected on, was I actually making an impact? So I'm teaching 300 students a year. Is the teaching I'm doing actually helping them? And so I'm sort of like you. I'm like a data guy. So I was like, well, I got to know data to prove this. So I went and I started studying all the LinkedIn profiles. I did surveys of all my former students to look to see, was I actually helping them go on and start something? And I didn't care whether they started a company or not, but they're taking an entrepreneurship class. So the question is like, am I helping them start, some kind of a venture, a product, an idea, whatever the hell it is, a year after taking my class? And so I pull back in the data. I kind of like looking at the spreadsheet and I like in the reveal, I like do the sum total and look at it. And the results were like depressing. It was like, of these 300 kids, like 1.6 per year were going on to start something. And that was like awful. I was like, that's that's nothing. Like, what are you even doing? You're not having any impact on this one. So I basically made up my mind that I was quitting. So I told Georgetown, hey, it's been really fun. I enjoy it. I'm happy to stick around as like a mentor, but I'm out. Like I'm sort of done teaching. And they were like, don't go. Please don't go. And I was like, oh, that's really nice. They actually think I'm doing a good job. No, it turned out that they just didn't have anyone to teach the class for the fall. So they were like, please stay and teach one more semester. So I agreed to teach one more semester. And I was sort of like, sort of bitter about it. I was like, why do I want to do the same thing again? I know it doesn't work. I'd already seen this movie. And so a couple of days before class was about to start, one of my best friends, this guy, Shane Mack, and I have we just always text back and forth. And I'm sort of lamenting the fact that I got to teach this class. And he's like, kind of like, dude, get over yourself. Like, what's your problem? Like, just man up was sort of the advice. And I was like, kind of a little wake-up call. He's like, listen, you got this opportunity. Why don't you try and do something about it? Like, it's not like they could fire you for doing something crazy. You already quit. And so I was like, well, that's kind of good advice, I guess. You're right. And so we started chatting about our own experiences as entrepreneurs. And Shane's the founder of a company called Assist, which is a enterprise chatbot company doing like artificial intelligence and human conversations. And so we're talking about our own experiences growing up. What were the best classes we had? And the interesting thing that we both kind of came to is when we were both in our 20s, both of us, as luck would have it, had both written and published books. And these weren't like books that were well read. Like, not many people read my book. I made like 17 cents an hour for all the work that I did on the 2 books I published. But the act of publishing a book was super valuable for me. I learned a lot. It was part of the reason why Startup Weekend invited me to the board. I got, hired at Aperture because they saw this expertise. And so I sort of like thought to myself, well, what if rather than teaching them how to start a company, I taught them how to like discover their passions and these sorts of things by writing a book and write on whatever they wanted. So this is like 3 days before class is about to start. I kind of hatched this idea with Shane's sort of urging to like have them write a book. And we were very like modest at the time. We're like, listen, if one kid out of this class writes a book, that's a huge success. And so we'll see how this goes. So I sort of retooled my syllabus, walked into class the first day, and I was like, all right, guys, remember how you signed up for this entrepreneurship class? Well, instead of learning to launch a company, you all are going to launch a book. And they all looked at me like I was crazy. Like, what is this guy's problem? Which is, in fairness, I get it, right? Like they didn't sign up for this, number one. And number two, I asked them, how many of you have ever written more than a 10-page paper? And one kid in the room raises his hand. So like this was not what they were expecting. But, in fairness, they although they were sort of nervous and had their reservations, they decided to hear me out. And in fact, more people enrolled in the class after hearing this.
Are we talking like first-year students or?
These were it's about a mix of sort of a third, sophomores, juniors, and seniors.
Gotcha.
So they're coming into this class like it's like an elective entrepreneurship class. And the class was called Launching the Venture. So in prior years, I'd taught all the standard stuff, how to launch a company. And here's me taking the exact same methodologies like customer discovery, lean startup, that sort of stuff, but saying instead just apply it to launching a book. And I had no idea if it would work. I had the good fortune of connecting with Tucker Max, who is a New York Times bestseller. He has started a company called Book in a Box that sort of teaches people how to write and publish books. And so I talked to him. He'd sent me the book, the manuscript that they'd used to teach people how to do it. And so I was like, all right, we're going to try it. And at the end of the semester, it was crazy. Like these students turned in manuscripts. And the first thing that was crazy about them is they were actually really long. Like they were they had written on average like 100-page paper if they were writing a paper, like a 21,000 word manuscript, which is shocking, right? For people who've never written 15-page papers. And then I read them and they were really good. They were like passionate and what things they cared about. And so I went back to Tucker and I was like, hey, listen, I want to send you some of these and let me know what you think. And he got back to me right away. He's like, man, these are actually really good. Let's help him publish. And so we helped him publish. And that April, again, sort of less than a year ago, crazy to think about, we helped 15 authors publish their books. One of them, the 16th one, was signed by a book agent. And it was amazing. They launched books. They were really proud of them. But then what was the most amazing part is kind of what happened next. They all started using this book as a tool for themselves to get credibility. And so, one of the guys, Will McDonald, basically got hired as a venture capitalist over people who had MBAs from Wharton and Stanford and had started companies because this book was for him a piece of evidence that made him stand out. A guy, Shiv, got hired as a soccer scout because he had written a book on finding the next great talented soccer player in India. A woman, Jacqueline, had raised a $20,000 Kickstarter largely by selling her book as a Kickstarter tool. So the powerful thing was how much it changed their mindset. And for me, that was sort of the eureka moment. I was like, holy cow, like I can actually change these people's mindset by helping them create something, this piece of evidence from a book.
That's fascinating. And I think you touched on a great point in terms of startups and entrepreneurship, that serendipity happens when you work hard and people who are willing to help you, and your hard work and your passion kind of enables them to get behind you and help you with the things you don't know about yet.
Yep. A lot of things that you don't know when you start a book. And I mean, it's different. A normal author, I would say, someone who's written a book, and even in my case of writing a book, I didn't know a lot, but I had enough knowledge to sort of like directionally, convince a publisher that I should write this book. These are people who are, 18, 19, 20 years old. And so they haven't had a lot of life experience. And I get a lot of pushback saying like, what is some, 19-year-old going to know enough to write a book? And my answer back to them is like, well, they don't when they start. But if they go through this process of like self-discovery and customer discovery and interviewing people, on average, these folks interview 15 to 20 experts in the field and they capture their stories and they build a structure. They can basically become an expert. And if they do, dear God, we should publish it for them. So I think that's kind of what's interesting about it is we oftentimes say that you have to report on the knowledge that you've already gathered. And I said, well, what if we could instead help them structurally gather the knowledge and share it, what they're learning, and publish it in a book? And that's basically been what's happened.
And it's fascinating too, the way society views things sometimes, right? Because if Tim Ferriss goes and asks 100 people 10 questions and then just publish a really heavy book that has answers to those 10 questions and just those 10 questions, that's an amazing bestseller, millions of dollars, fame forever. But when a 17-year-old with no experience does the same thing, people question it. Like, what does he really know?
Well, Tim Ferriss was 117, right? We all were. I think it's just that the bigger thing that's gone on is there used to be gatekeepers who would make it difficult. And I think today there's been massive disruption. And it's part of the reason this class can even exist is we can use sort of the fact that we've, now things like Spotify and SoundCloud exist to allow people to break artists. The same thing happens with Amazon and some of their publishing tools is we can help these authors create books, get distribution. We can use platforms like Upwork to help design amazing covers, find editors. So there's a lot of things that I think have conspired to help make this possible today, and that weren't even around a couple years ago. So I think that's been part of the learning is it's a timing piece that I think the world of sort of knowledge-based content has changed. And it's not only affecting the publishing industry, but you're seeing it with television and things like Netflix, and you're seeing it with music and SoundCloud and Spotify. So you're seeing these platform shifts, and I think that's part of the reason why this opportunity exists for this class and these authors who've leveraged it.
And it's amazing that you were able to enable it over basically 6 months time frame. Does it mean you're still at the university, still teaching? Like that brought you back? And
yeah. It was famous last words saying I was going to quit. Here's me now not quitting. Yeah, I mean, that was, I think, what sort of happened. I think what I realized in it was sort of two big things. I think the first thing that I realized is it wasn't their fault that they weren't having these impacts, that they weren't having these outcomes. It was my fault. I was teaching the way most everyone teaches, which is basically pumping information at people. So I was basically standing up and lecturing, and we're doing some exercise, but for the most part, I was expecting the other people to consume the information and then regurgitate it in some way, shape, or form. Whereas what I'm doing now is really coaching people through an experience where they have to learn. They have to kind of grow. And so the biggest shift that I've realized is like, you can coach someone to do incredible things. Learning is something that like is difficult if it's like just consuming information. But when you actually push someone to say, hey, I want you to sort of tell these stories, I want you to teach someone these things, it forces them to go much deeper. And I've been amazed to see the depth at which these students have become experts in spaces. And for me, it's been so fulfilling. I was telling my wife this the other day. I mean, I have a bookcase now of all my authors. I've created this thing that I call the Manuscript Library, where I keep all of the books. It'll be over 60 authors, 75 authors by the time we hit the summer. And I have a bookcase with all of them as their books, but also I keep a sort of a record of the first draft manuscript they turned in, because it's not just about the finished product, it's this iteration. And so I think this sort of sense of being able to help people create something that demonstrates what they care about openly, getting feedback on it. To me, I believe that's like one of the most rewarding things I can do right now is help enable more people to create something that they believe is a representation of them.
And this whole book experience also very similar to entrepreneurship and building a company. And I think, at least from what I've learned, you can get an idea, and like you mentioned with Zaarly, right? You can have somewhat of an idea of what you're trying to accomplish, but you have to constantly keep learning and constantly reevaluating the market to actually find where you need to go for your customers. And it seems like that's what your students were doing in their book. So that's just fascinating.
They have to find a value proposition, right? I mean, same exact things. They have to do a lot of customer interviews, and you know, they don't always know where it's going to go at the start. And so it is. What I would share with you now, knowing what I know now, is I want to create less entrepreneurs graduating from college. I think we set people up for failure when we sort of say, go start a company. We teach them all like the logistical things about how to do lean startup and that sort of stuff. What we miss is the emotional and the sort of passion side of this one. I want people to sort of be able to explore their curiosity and become really knowledgeable. I want them to sort of, to me, I think the reason a book is a better proxy for starting a company, like to go through that process and then start a company, is it forces you to really make sure you love something before you go do it. You fall in love with an area and then decide to continue on to it. But creating a book takes 9 months. I mean, it takes a long time to do it, and sometimes longer if you don't go through this experience that we go through, which is sort of rapid. And as you know, if you're going to start a company, it is going to be hard. You're going to run into issues. And so you might as well spend that time really understanding the knowledge so that when you start the company, it's much easier for you to effectively like just know more, right? You know more, and you've developed sort of a competency that other people see you as more knowledgeable. They have more trust that you will sort of stick to it. And ultimately, I think you can identify problems when you've spent that much time trying to teach someone about a space you're exploring.
We can probably talk about this forever.
Yeah, no, I just want. I don't like it.
Yeah, it's an awful subject, but I do want to kind of keep in mind our listeners who are not startup folks and maybe don't want to do startups. But what I do want to know is, and this is something you tweeted when we decided you were coming to Red Hat Show, that once you did a startup, it made you into a better parent.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And now let's can you talk a little bit about that, given all these experiences, and also, you know, tell us about your kids a little bit.
Yeah.
What are they?
Yeah.
Like?
I am super fortunate. I am a girl dad, which I think is a term of art. I grew up with two brothers, and I didn't know much about. I went to an all guys high school growing up, so for me, I was a little terrified when we found out we were having a girl, and because I'd never really didn't grow up with girls that much. I mean, I had cousins and stuff like that, but there's something about like knowing what it's like to be a boy that I was sort of terrified of, and I am like wildly in love with being a dad of a daughter for a whole bunch of reasons. I have two daughters now. I have a little more than a 3-year-old and an 18-month-old, Quinn and Parker. And they're awesome. You know, they are a challenge and a headache at times. But what I think has been so interesting for me about the point I am in my life is I was at the point when I'm sort of going through this experience. I'm, having kids. I was in the midst of like working on a venture fund with some people that we started a venture firm, and that had its joys and ups and downs. And I was, teaching, and I was doing all these things. As you said earlier, my sort of trajectory is like many hats. And I sort of like got this chance to say, like, listen, having kids is really important to me, and I want to do it, and I love it, and I'm enjoying the experience. How do I design my life in a way that allows me to be fulfilled as a dad and as a parent, but also to be fulfilled as someone who wants to be working on hard problems, wants to scratch those itches of working on challenging things? And so I read a blog post a couple of months back, or maybe a year back, about this concept of anti-goals. And what do you not want to do? And that really colored a lot of the way that I found myself thinking about myself as a parent, and as projects I pursue, how I spend my time with my Georgetown kids and my real kids these days. Is I made a choice to say, I want to try and do something that doesn't force me to travel as much. I want to try and do something that allows me to be home as often as possible from 6 to 9 p.m. when they're back from daycare and at dinner time. And the reason I would say I feel like that experience has made me just sort of better at a lot of things is it's forced me to deal with constraints. I think the thing I realized when I was an entrepreneur, and even back to a lawyer, is my philosophy was no one's going to outwork me. And so I'm going to work 24/7. I'm going to basically make that a priority. And that led to some sloppiness in some senses. I was like, I would go to any meeting, whatever time it was, I would do any networking event, I would do everything. And in some senses, it taught me that maybe that wasn't a good move. Like maybe I was sort of consuming too many things and not focused enough. So it's been interesting to sort of process this of saying, hey, these are important things to me, these anti-goals of trying to limit my travel, trying to do things, sort of have more time with my kids, trying to, be an equal co-parent to my wife who has a very demanding research job as a professor. And so it's been interesting to sort of play that out. And I've loved it, frankly, because I feel like I can do both, but I've had to make choices about how to do both.
That's a great way to put it. And actually perfect time to talk about this. I don't know if you saw Twitter news where Mike Moritz from Sequoia sort of wrote this article talking about how American employees are really getting lazy. Mm-hmm. And compared us to Chinese employees who basically sleep at work, yep. And spend like 20 minutes a day with their yep. kids, allegedly. And that led to a lot of different conversations. And some VCs said, well, you got to pick really exciting goals in life. Like kids are great, but you got to change the world. But the response to that was, well, what's the point of changing the world if you're not going to live in it?
Yeah,
which is fair, right? So kind of how do you see that, how much time to spend with kids versus how much time to spend at work now that they're this age?
Yeah. And I think, so I think it's a tough question to balance. I think the challenge that I would say, and I see it, there's sort of different questions that there's some gender roles in all of this that I think can be challenging to sort of unpack. And so it's been interesting to watch these same challenges with my wife, who also has a very demanding job. She wants to be fulfilled at that one. She has aspirations, and the same with me. So I think there's sometimes some unique gender things. So I don't want to go too much into that one because I think there's a difference between men and women. But I would say for me, what I've found is I think you can still have a huge impact and be able to be a great dad and do that in a way. I think that what I would say you need to be thoughtful of is sort of focus, the question of focus. And I think, there's this interesting article that I've sort of become enamored with that talks about the 25-5 rule of Warren Buffett. And Warren Buffett basically says, like, super successful guy. He works really hard. But when asked what the secret of the success was, he said, listen, every, period of time, every quarter, every month, whatever it is, he's like, I sit down and I write out the 25 most important goals I have in life. And then what I do is I relentlessly try to avoid doing anything at 6 through 25. And what he says is like success, a big picture success comes from focus, and it comes from deep focus on things. And what I recognize about myself from this, and what I would say has made me feel better about myself, feel like I'm on pace to do things that I believe in. I'm super excited to be able to help, over 100 authors publish and find their dreams this year, which is incredible. Many publishers don't do that at all. And to be able to help do it is sort of an amazing thing. And I think only scratching the surface, but that has actually come from cutting out other things that I could be doing that might be interesting and shiny objects to focus on this one thing and go deep on it. So for me, I think I believe that my wife and my kids are number 1 and 2 in that group. But for me, it's less about saying like, all right, what's 6 through 25, but more about saying like, all right, 3, 4, and 5 are really important to me. And I'm going to focus on those ones and I'm going to avoid the other things. So I think I still work hard. Like I go to work after they go to bed, and I'm constantly thinking about things and spending weekends and nights, and sometimes I do travel. But I think it's about kids have been a constraint that I've added to my life that I feel good about. And in some ways it's forced me to think about what I probably shouldn't be doing anyways. But if I have, extra bandwidth, I'll do these things. And so I think it's given me a constraint and maybe a forced constraint that I didn't have before that I think makes me better at a bunch of different things. We'll see, right? Like, I don't know. I've not solved any magical things yet, but I feel personally fulfilled. And I feel like I'm working on something that I feel great about.
Right. The hard part with this parenting thing is you don't actually know the answer until they turn out, 20, 30, what have you. And then you can kind of see the progress, right? And if you go on the internet, you can find answers to everything and they'll all conflict. And basically you just have to make up your own mind and stick to it. Yeah.
That's the secret of this. A good couple friend of ours just had good news this weekend. They were able to adopt a 5-day-old baby, and they've been trying for a while and had this amazing opportunity. And so for them, it was sort of a bit of a surprise. Usually, we have this 9-month period when you could start to plan. For them, it was like sort of, having lunch with a coworker on Thursday, and Thursday afternoon, get a call, come down to Florida and pick up your new baby. Right. So what's been interesting to hear them talk about some of these things is I think, there is so much information out there that you could start to question what you should do and how you should be afraid. And what I think my wife and I basically gave them as advice is to say, listen, you basically just have to do the best you can and know that there is no right. We've been doing kids for a long time. And the most important person that you have to satisfy is yourself. And, they came to live with you. And as long as you sort of satisfy feeling like you've done what you set out to do and you raise them in a place that's happy and healthy, the data actually shows it's sort of hard to screw them up much more than that, other than that, right? It's hard to – they're going to be what they're going to be. There's an awful lot of genetics in it. And if you pick what is your strategy for working with your kids, as long as you're consistent to that one and the way you feel good about it, I think that's the best that I could do. So I would say it this way. I take a little issue with your thing 20, 30 years from now, did you do a good job? I don't really think like that. I think, though, that did I set a strategy that I'm excited about, which I feel like I have, and I'm executing to that one, and then the results are something that will be largely out of my hands, but I will feel good about the way I played the game. It's kind of like a startup, right? As long as I play the game well and I do what I can to do it, there's a large chance of this luck. It's as Dustin Moskowitz says, the founder, one of the Facebook first employees and the founder of Asana. Basically there's all these factors and luck is one of them, and it's anywhere from 0 to 1 million. That's how much luck plays into it. And I think the same goes with kids. Genetics play a big role in it, and all these other things play into it. But if you do what you can, you give yourself a shot to have great kids, and whatever. The journey's been pretty fun.
You're absolutely right. And I didn't realize this until you said it, but by saying, we'll look at our kids at 20, 30 and see what they're like, I'm basically setting a goal, and probably very unrealistic goal. But as long as I'm happy with the progress now and I have a set of sort of guiding principles that I'm working based on, then it all makes sense, right? That's I think that's impeccable advice, just to think about it in very different terms.
It is. I think there's something about startups, being a founder and being a parent. There's something to those ones that's true, because there's an awful lot of things like startups are this little thing that you like there's market forces at play. There's other employees at play. There's a lot of things you can't control. And same with kids, right? Like they're going to get sick some days. You can't control that. They're going to pick friends that you don't like. They're going to like, there's just all sorts of things you can't control. And I think as soon as I, at least for the best that I could, started to like look at things to say what's out of my control and what is. And there's only a few things that I can do that are in my control. And that means like being present when I can, trying to avoid things that will cause strife. And, but for the most part, I think I just try to, be consistent. And if I do that, like there's a lot of factors that are out of my control that will determine whether they're the next Einstein or whether they're basically just someone who scrapes by. Who knows? But I hope at least that I give them a shot to be the next Einstein if that's what they really want to do.
Now that you're a professor and you see the kids in your class, do you see anything you could do early on with your kids or, with their schooling, anything that would set them for success or hypothetically would increase their chances to be successful?
Yeah, I mean, I get asked this question periodically now because although our kids are only 3 and 18 months, in some ways, what does the world look like? And education is changing a lot. And as I said, like I was sort of disillusioned with a little bit of the current way of like sort of the World Bank came out with a study saying that globally there's a learning crisis. And I attribute that a lot to the typical ways of basically pushing out information. So I think that is something that we need to be thoughtful of as I'm thinking about my kids and our kids, broadly speaking. Here's the first thing that I think is important. I would say, I want to raise a kid who is curious, for sure. And I think that's something that's important. And I think putting labels on someone like, do I want Quinn and Parker to be able to be entrepreneurs? Yeah, that'd be awesome. Or do I want them to like be accountants? That'd be awesome too. But as long as they're curious in the way they approach that, great. Like that sort of is number one. The second thing that I would sort of share, and this is a broad thing that I've learned about this from this book class and the research behind it, is that success today is driven so much more by what you create versus where you associate. So what I mean by that is it used to be that you were a success if you would go to a great college. That's no longer guaranteed anymore. And so what I would share is I think we should be focusing on setting up our kids to create their own evidence of competency, of passions, of purpose. So writing that book, doing that activity, putting together their own dance recital, whatever it is, those creation activities, inspire kids to do those things, because I think that what's going to change over the next couple of decades, and it's like college will never go away. It should always be something for people. But I think what is going to be important is like that's not enough. You need to pick a school that's going to help you, be able to learn some skills to help you create, differently. I think we're going toward more of an individualized world where it's not, all these kids who go to XYZ prestigious school are going to be the first ones picked. It's going to be about the people who have something different about them. It's the people who do improv comedy and someone says like, that's interesting. You learn something that makes you better fit for a particular job, or someone who, does a podcast or writes a book or launches a product, whatever it is. I think those activities are what you want to foster. And so I would say, I am actively thinking about how I can help Quinn and Parker create things. Like I want to, this is sort of crazy to say, but I'm excited for when they're a little bit older and I can help them create a children's book, because now I know how to like do publishing. So like that part's not that hard. So now like I want to create something with them so they can get the experience of it. And I think that'll be something fun that I'm looking forward to doing at some point. Like how do I help them create things they're proud of?
Actually, I'm curious, you mentioned a children's book, and children's books can be wildly successful and also, bring money. We talked about this earlier, about $1 billion company and have this giant idea like Uber. But now that you're a dad, doing the thing you're doing, do you think it's important? Like, are you still striving for $1 billion idea, or do you think there's just a lot more to life and you could maybe do something else?
So I frame this problem differently. I used to be really fixated on having this big, massive impact. And that's why I think I was so excited to raise, $50 or $60 million with Zaarly and like tackling some of these things in the way that we tackled it. I think that I thought in terms of like, you have to be tackling something massive to have impact. And I flipped that around. I still believe that you should be striving to do something powerful. And I feel like, every one of my student authors, I'm helping them achieve their dreams. I feel really great about it. I feel like I have an opportunity to change each person's life, which is powerful. But I think differently. I think that life today for me, success is going to be a series of micro impacts. And so each and every author that I get to impact, I want to have them have a real meaningful, substantive impact that they look at me and say, that guy helped me achieve the best who I could be. And so I look at this now as I want to have a bunch of micro impacts. I feel like I've had, I taught a lot of classes. I had a lot of students, but I don't think I had the real depth of impact that I wanted to do. But success to me will be, over time, gathering up all of those micro impacts and seeing how big the pile gets. And, I do think about, as this opportunity to teach people becomes more powerful and sort of coach people through this creation experience, how do I do more of it? How am I able to do more of it and yet give people this amazing experience? So for me, I think the flip was I used to think about it in like how this big, massive impact, in a massive market, whereas today I think about like, let me make sure that every single person that I'm having an impact on, it's transformative for them. Like, is this something, writing a book, creating a podcast, is it powerful for them? It's amazing to say, but like I get told probably at least every couple of days by one of my current or former authors that this experience has changed their life. And that's amazing to get said. I don't think I can't tell you how amazing that makes me feel to know it, but I don't want to like lose sight of the fact that like, if changing one person's life, that they believe that what you've done for them has changed their life, that's a freaking massive impact to them. And so I don't want to stop doing that for those people, for the people like for lack of like doing something bigger. I just want to figure out how I can keep doing it for each person. And then my goal is to continue to figure out how to do it for more people by teaching more people how to do this methodology. I just used to do it at Georgetown. Now I have, over 25 different authors, 35 different authors from outside of Georgetown who are going through the experience, and they're having the same experience. So I think that's what I think is this. I don't think that I think about it from a standpoint of, I've lessened my goals. I just think that I'm measuring it differently. And that is like, I'm measuring to make sure I'm having a great impact, and then think about scale as how do I just have more micro impacts that can make the pile bigger, but not losing sight of the micro impact is what's really crucial.
I love it. And I think what you just said is a perfect guideline for kids as well, right? If you raise them to think that way, if you raise them, essentially that's what you said at the very beginning, to raise kids to be curious, and micro impacts are the outcome of being curious. Yep.
That's right. I think that's where I would have changed my focus is, and part of this, I have a book coming out this summer called Cred that we looked and we researched all of the Forbes 30 under 30 for the past 7 years. So there's about 3,400 of them. And on the face, you look at them and say, oh gosh, like a lot of these are entrepreneurs. A lot of these are people who are like in these sort of prestigious jobs and roles. But if you go one layer deeper, that's where I think the big aha for me is all of these people, for the most part, had this step in their journey where they created something, not a business, but a representation of what they cared about. They would write a book. They would do a podcast. They would publish research. They would put on an album like Chance the Rapper. They would create an article series like Daniel Morrill before Mattermark. They would do these sort of like things that would sort of be evidence of what they cared about. Lin-Manuel Miranda, before he wrote Hamilton, he basically like shared the first 6 bars of the opener at a White House function before it was a thing, right? Like that's the things that I think we need to do. And I think for me that ability to help more people and be inspired to create something is what's so powerful. And I don't know, I feel really good about the ability to help people realize that we all can be a creator, and we don't have to be fascinated by a business. We just have to get in the game of creating, and good things will come from it.
I feel really empowered talking to you.
You're gonna write a book? I'm in. Let's do it.
I should. Yes. The amount of like good energy coming through this conversation is amazing. And with all of your experiences and how you channeling into your kids and all of your Georgetown kids, and now, all the people you're working with, it's just fabulous. And, I think I'm inspired, and just by this conversation, I hope.
Yeah. And I would tell you this, I'd say, one of the things that I've to that point, I do feel like I've been given an incredible opportunity to sort of see the world differently and help other people see it differently. The biggest change that's happened is that now we create our way to success. We don't sort of associate our way to success. So people are going to succeed by what they do, not by where they go, right? Like you're not going to succeed in the same way just because you get into Stanford and graduate or take a job at Goldman Sachs. You're going to succeed by what you create that shows you what you want to do. And so I think for me, what I've realized is that also is a big kind of responsibility or obligation I have. And so I love to help people go through the experience of finding what they should create, because I do think, yeah, it's sort of easy to hear this and say, yeah, like Eric said, like I should create something. Like, oh my God, what does that mean? But what I've realized is it basically takes about a month of a coached experience to sort of kind of this reflection process. And so I've been really fortunate to be able to do a couple hundred students through like a 1 month, totally free experience that helps them basically discover what they should create. What is the book that you should write? What is the podcast you should create? What is the event you should put on? And to me, I think being a creator is still really, it takes courage. And so I think I feel really empowered when someone says like, I know I want to be a creator, but I don't know how. Can you help me? And that experience is pretty amazing to see someone say, yeah, like I do see the world differently. Maybe one day I want to start a company, but how do I get started now? And that ability to help someone discover something inside them, amazing. This woman, Monica Fritz, she wrote a book called Graduate Your Beer Craft. And she said, I love beer. Can I write a book on beer? I was like, absolutely. So she wrote a book on beer and it was great. And a couple of days before graduation, she comes to me and says like, listen, Eric, I don't have a job yet. And I was like, oh, what? I can't believe it. Like your book was one of the best well-written. I was like, tell me where you're applying. And she rattles off, I've applied to the Yankees and ESPN and I applied to Clorox and this laundry list. And I was like, Monica, there's one thing missing from this gigantic list you've just laid out. And that is like beer. Yeah, right? Like beer. You just wrote a book on beer. Did you not think to apply to those companies? And she looks at me and she's like, well, I just thought that was sort of like a fun thing I did. And I was like, no, like that's the thing. You just created a way to show off like what you care about. And there's tons of people in that one. And so suddenly when that light bulb went off, she like, oh gosh, okay. Send out a few resumes. And she literally got a job without giving the resume to the company of the largest beer distributor in the entire East Coast in a 10-minute interview. They asked for her book, talked about it, and now she's working in the marketing group of the largest beer distributor on the East Coast because it just is evidence of someone's purpose. Like when you share something you care about, that is like taking a risk. It's putting yourself out there and people like, yeah, maybe some people will judge you, but for the most part, people will be inspired by you and say, I want to do everything I can to let this woman have an opportunity in a place she cares about. I want to help this person start this company, whatever it is. So there's, it is rewarding to help people see those opportunities.
Isn't that amazing how simple it was, but how hard it is to see it when you're the person struggling with it? It's why I tell people all the time, you have to find a coach. That's the key. It is hard to do this alone. That's why this experience, I tell people it's not taught, it's coached. Yeah, I'm going to send you some video lectures to watch and give you a guided process to follow. But really my job is to help pull you up when you get stuck. Like one of the authors is working on this incredible book on food and race. And she wrote me saying like, maybe I should just wait and do this in a couple of years. And I was like, no, like think about what you've already created, how great it is. And I got a note from her like literally today. She's like, thank you. Like, I feel like I'm on it again. And like, this is just the start of the conversation. So it is something that like, it's hard to do these things, especially on your own. It's isolating when the systems are set up to sort of push you into like taking the most prestigious, company or college, going to the most prestigious college, doing the sort of normal interviewing thing, going to the most prestigious company to sort of like step out of line a little bit and create something that you get judged on. It's terrifying. So it's not for the faint of heart. You want to have people around you who can support you and cheerlead you as you do something. You're a great guy. We'll see. My kids may not say that, but I feel fortunate to get to do it. And I think you're right. You asked the right question. I think I am going to have so much fun with our kids because like I'm excited to explore some of these things together and see them create some cool stuff. And yeah, listen, I'm stoked. I've talked to some cool parents who've done some cool projects with their kids, and yeah, like I want to help them try to do some interesting stuff. And in a way, you've had experience with dozens of kids now. So once your kids are at that age,
they're
exactly
no
what
different,
to do.
whether they're 21 years old or whether they're 3. I think it's all about coaching and realizing like, I don't really think you could force someone to do anything. You just sort of have to like figure out what they want to do. And it's like bowling with bumper bulls. You sort of have to keep people in their lanes. And that was a big insight for me, is like, our 3-year-old is going to do what she wants to do. She's like headstrong. She could do those sorts of things. And so my job is to make sure that she sort of is safe on one sense, but more importantly, like guide her in those right directions. And she's not going to follow my advice directly. Neither are my college kids, right? Or I'm working with the people who are in their 50s and 60s as well. But basically it's about give them like sort of a path to follow and kind of keep them on it when they feel like they're falling off track.
No, that's perfect. And I love the fact that you basically just said that you're not considering your kids, or maybe correct me if I'm wrong, but you're not thinking of them as little babies. No.
They're humans. They're like, they're fascinating to watch, right?
They're humans with constraints.
That's right. They don't have the verbal skills yet. They don't have the emotional range yet, but they are their own creatures with their own desires, their own thoughts. And for me, I tell my wife this all the time. My job as a parent, if you played sports growing up, I remember my coaches would always yell, whether you're on the baseball field or the soccer field or basketball field, like be in the ready position was what it was called, right? You want to be on your toes, have your knees bent, your arms up, ready to go. Because when the ball comes at you or whatever happens, you need to be able to move. And that's like what parenting is like. It's like sort of always being in the ready position, because you don't know when the ball is going to come at you. You don't know this weekend, this will tell you how not great of a parent I am at times. But one of our daughter, Parker, she's 18 months, and she's like learning to use the stairs. She fell down like 4 stairs. Like she was fine, but you just have to be ready and like, all right, you're okay. And then 2 hours later, right, here's me thinking, okay, that was fine. 2 hours later, she's playing on the bed and she rolls off and falls off the bed. And I'm like, I must be the worst parent ever. But it's sort of like you can't control those things. I could put my padding all over my entire house, but listen, they're going to fall. They're going to hurt themselves. Your job is to be in the ready position and help them learn from it. And that's to me the only way I'm able to navigate through it. Because if I tried to force them into processes and doing exactly what we say, I would go bonkers. So ready position, that's my strategy.
I was interviewing Casper Babypants a couple of days ago for the Red Dad podcast, and he mentioned one thing that he would tell all the parents is that when your kids fall, figuratively and not, it's not that you're a bad parent. It's their job to do it. And as long as you pick them up and they go back to you when they fall, you did a great job, because what they're doing is they're testing their boundaries. And as long as they can trust you to be there to help them, that actually means you're doing a great job.
Yep.
So I think you're extremely right in this sense.
I'm right until I'm wrong tomorrow. And it is constantly being curious. But also, I tweeted this today, and to the point of being a parent again. And I will say this about my own anything I said today. It's not meant to be advice. It's just meant to be my story. And I think the thing I tweeted today is the secret between success and failure is knowing which 90% of advice to avoid and which 10% to consider. Everything is so personal, and you sort of have to figure out what fits within yours. So who knows if this helps someone be inspired or think about things differently? Awesome. But I can't give anyone advice. I can just basically say, here's how I did it. And, our kids turned out okay for the most part, other than some stair falling. And really, I think I've built a framework that I feel good about. And, listen, I don't, like you said, I don't predict to know what success will look like in any of these things. I feel good about the balance between being a dad and being able to do stuff I'm fulfilled by, having those micro impacts. But man, every day it's being in the ready position and just hoping that I get another chance to do it tomorrow.
That is beautiful advice. And look, I'd love to talk to you about all the nitty gritty of raising kids and all the details, but I think we'll save it for the next episode. And we'll sort of wrap it up on this note. It's been awesome talking to you. I learned a ton. I got inspired.
All right, let's talk about it. I'm serious. I'm serious. We should.
Yeah, we should. I'm serious too. I mean, why not?
Should.
I feel like with right coaching, I can just get on my keyboard right now and begin out.
I think everyone, my big goal in life, and I say this to you as a friend, someone I've known for a while, it sounds a little crazy, but I believe that every college junior in America should do this experience. And I hope every 18-year-old should do this experience of creating a book, because I think that it's like just something that we all can do. And I think that like it really is a moment in time when you can reflect on what you've learned, what you care about. Every single one of us has a book in us. It's just about being able to approach it the right way, to not get wrapped up in the nitty-gritty details of it, but more about what do you want to learn and how do you share that. If you think about the book as the ultimate way that you can share what you've learned about something so that others can learn too, you've succeeded. So we'll help you write that book, and I'm excited to help you do it.
Thank you very much. And you said your book Cred's coming this summer, right?
I think it tells the story of how success today is how we create our own credibility today, and that's the secret to success, rather than kind of the old world of borrowing it from the institutions that we go to for schooling or we go to work. And happiness, success, wealth all come to the people that create their own credibility.
Thank you for listening to this episode of The Rad Dad Show. If you enjoyed this episode, please tell your friends. Facebook, Twitter, email, Slack, wherever you are. Every time you share this podcast with your friends, it helps me to keep going. Also, if you want to suggest a guest or a topic that I should bring on the show, please go to raddadshow.com and let me know. I hope to see you soon. This has been Rad Dad Show and your host, Kirill Zubovsky. Till next time.